So my name is Vince Ewell. I'll be the host or administrator of this webinar, whatever the right word is. So this is, we're focused on the Nile River, and we're also going to be looking at lessons learned from the Colorado River Basin. Just a word for our sponsors. Sheesh, how do you put this down? Sorry. These are some of the organizations sponsoring this webinar. We just want to give thanks to them. And let me briefly introduce the speakers. I'm the moderator, and I'll be briefly introducing the webinar and then passing on to Ambassador Lang Schemerhorn, who is a former ambassador to Djibouti and has spent quite a few years working in the Horn of Africa and elsewhere. Lang will be followed by Dr. Hani Swelam, who's a professor of water resources management at RWTH Aachen University in Germany. Dr. Hani's worked a lot with the UN and other organizations, and is well versed in Nile River Basin issues. He will be followed by Dr. Seifu Kabede, who is a professor of hydrogeology at the University of KwaZulu in South Africa, and formerly was a professor of hydrogeology at Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia, and is quite active in groundwater matters in sub-Saharan Africa. And lastly, we'll hear from Dr. David Kramer, a professor of geosciences at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And also David is president of the International Association of Hydrogeologists. So with that, let me begin briefly. We just some input. There'll be questions and answers after the four speakers. And if you can put your questions into the chat box, that'd be great. And for the speakers, I'll give you kind of a 2-minute warning so that we can be on schedule. We're looking at an 1.5-hour webinar with half an hour of questions and answers. So just a quick overview. In green is the footprint of the Nile Basin, extending from Burundi in the south up to the Delta at Alexandria in the north. There's 10 plus countries in the basin, and in terms of dams, which is always a subject of interest, some of the famous ones are the Aswan High Dam in Egypt, the White Nile Dam near Khartoum, the Sennar and the Rosarius dams on the Blue Nile in the Sudan. The GERD, which is not on this map, is just to the east of the Rosarius Dam, and then the Owens Falls Dam in Uganda. And just to give a rainfall or precipitation overview, the variation is from less than 100 millimeters per year in the north. And then as we move south to Uganda and southeast into the Ethiopian highlands, there can be areas where there's greater than 2,000 millimeters per year of rainfall. So quite a variation in precipitation from north to south. And with that, I will pass the baton to Ambassador Lang Schemerhorn. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. Good morning, everyone. I have some information here that covers the territory and talks about political and other issues beyond the basic water discussion. So I think you can see my slides, right? Okay, first, that's we're doing basically what we did last year, but
Dr. Lang, we cannot see your slides.
I'm sorry, what?
We cannot see your slides. I'm sorry.
This is going back, we see again the area that Vince just described here, which is the basin. Then we see a closer view of how the river branches out into the two Niles. And then introducing the territory, we have here, the Nile is the longest river in the world, 4,132 miles, going from the Valley and Lake Victoria up to the Mediterranean, or
If I can
down
interrupt,
again.
yeah, we can't, oh, here we go, great, now we got them, good, okay.
I'm sorry, you couldn't hear? Okay, well, I just saying we're introducing the territory here in the beginning, looking at some of the social and other political factors that impede what goes on and inform it. So first, we're introducing the territory, talking about the river. The Nile is the longest river in the world. It drains more than 3 million square miles in the Greater Horn of Africa, Central Africa, and Egypt. Monsoon rains affect it. The benefits downstream are fertilizer that goes to Sudan and Egypt and beyond. The major dams, Vince mentioned some of them, but the first dam was 1899, the Aswan High Dam, and currently the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is still under construction, but beginning to fill. The agreements from 1959 were a Nile Water Agreement, and more recently in 1999, midwifed with foreign help, a good bit of diplomatic help from Norway, to create the Nile River Basin Initiative, which we will talk more about in a minute. Now, what's going on today in this territory? There's ongoing controversy and increasing conflict. There's disputes among and between and within countries, within ethnic groups and within political parties. There's tremendous population pressure. There's a need for job creation, for alleviating poverty, and for improving health, for maintaining biodiversity and food sourcing. Now, these are the countries of the Nile River Basin Initiative. The major ones which are impacted directly by the dams are Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan, with a total of almost 300 million people. The other members of the initiative are 7 countries listed on the right, plus 1 observer country, Eritrea, totaling 288 million people. So the grand total impacted by the river amounts to almost 550 million people. And there's some comparative figures. The United States is 3rd in population in the world, behind, of course, China and India. So just for some comparison's sake there. Now, one of the very important demographics to keep in mind for Africa is median age. In Africa, the median age, meaning half of the population is above and half below, is 18 years, contrasted with, as you see, Europe, North America, Oceania, Asia, and South America. That's a tremendous differential, and it means there's a tremendous youth bulge looking for jobs, advancement, food, all sorts of things. The population density in the countries mainly impacted is there, and you see how dense it is in Egypt. Ethiopia, in the last 30 years, has had a tremendous increase in population. Percentage-wise, more than probably any other country. And Sudan, of course, sandwiched between them, is lightly populated relatively. Now, what are the issues and challenges? You could argue that the Horn and East and Central Africa are ground zero for climate change and environmental degradation. There are other challengers to that, of course, the Middle East, parts of island nations in the Pacific, Bangladesh, et cetera. But for all of the components that come together so dramatically, I would say ground zero for climate change is indeed in Africa, and particularly in the Horn and East and Central Africa. Now, the issues for the Nile River Basin countries are multiple challenges to serving rapidly growing and youth-centric populations, rising expectations, depleting aquifers that have been the source of water for many of these places. Egypt is challenged again by population. 80%, or some say more, as many as 90% of the population lives within 15 miles of the banks of the Nile. Ethiopia is a rising power with very ambitious to exercise regional and continental political and economic leadership. It's the headquarters of the the continental-wide African Union. And in the last year, it's been beset by political challenges of an extreme nature. Now, there are interconnected factors at play, and new to all of this is COVID-19 devastation. But the interconnected factors are climate change, environmental degradation, water security, periodic droughts, population pressures, mainly coming from need for job creation, chronic and increasing health problems, economic development, which is needed for job creation and value-added manufacturing to improve the local economies is very detrimental to maintaining biodiversity and maintaining the environment. Then we have security, terrorism, refugee, and in-country displaced person flows, which are being exacerbated by what's happening to the climate. What can we expect looking ahead? Well, renewed conflict in Ethiopia and Eritrea. This is not something new. This has been going on sporadically now for more than 100 years and long before that. But the current crisis in Ethiopia, internal crisis, has the potential for engulfing all of the Horn and increasing movements of people. We can see the urgency for dealing with climate and environmental challenges. As you said, I said before, Africa is ground zero and stimulating refugee flows, which are already at a high rate. And the interconnection between water and food security and refugees flows is, of course, very hard to parse. And also we have a changing landscape, however, which could be beneficial for energy sourcing. We have proliferation, increasing applications for alternative energies. And on the continent, we have potential. It varies in particular locales as to the amount and ability, but we have potential for geothermal, for hydro, of course, for solar, for wind, and for wave. Now, if you want to pursue some of the issues that we've raised in what I've just said, you might want to look at a few of these books. Particularly interesting is the first one, The 10th Parallel, Dispatches from the Fault Line Between Christianity and Islam. And that shows what the impact of desertification in the Sahel is and beyond is happening. And it's bringing the dividing line between Christianity and Islam further and further south into the middle of Nigeria now. So that tells that was published in 2008. That gives you a very good view of the social and economic and political impacts. Robert Kaplan, of course, is somewhat controversial, but always interesting to read his take on what is happening in the world today. So you'll be able to look back at this when you get the slides sent to you later and be able to think about some of these issues in relation to what you're going to be hearing from the rest of our speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Lang. Dr. Honey, you're next.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, thank you, Vincent, for the introduction. I'm Hani Sweden from the Aachen University in Germany, and I'm going to talk today about the WEF nexus, or the so-called water, energy, food nexus in the Nile Basin. I will be more technical than being political or being diplomatic. So it's more about the technical side of the interrelationships between water, energy, and food. And of course, with a focus on the 11 Nile Basin countries that you see on the screen. Of course, water, energy, food has a lot of opportunities, or offering us a lot of opportunities, but also a kind of source of conflict. Because when we speak about the relation between water and energy, for example, and we take the case of any dam, transboundary dam, then there is a potential for generating impact on the downstream while you're trying to produce energy. So water for energy, as we can see here, is one objective, but also water for food is another objective. So in the case of Ethiopia, trying to generate hydropower then might affect the other countries who are trying to generate food from the same amount of water that will be used for generating energy. Of course, there are always very good opportunities for collaboration, but we have also to see that this could be a source of conflict. And when I say water for energy, it does not mean it's one direction. As I just mentioned here, this arrow, because this is what I'm going to cover in this presentation, but it can also go in the other direction. Energy for water, there is no water treatment without high consumption of energy. There is no water desalination without high consumption of energy. For example, 40% of the cost of desalination is the cost of energy consumed for the process itself. So energy for water is also another aspect. And also there are a lot of interrelationships between food and energy. Using food products for biodiesel or biofuel is a relationship. We might disagree with this concept when we speak about sustainability, but it exists. And also using energies throughout the supply chain for producing food. So all of these are interrelationships. I'm going to skip a little bit, but focus here first on water for energy. When you speak about water for energy, try first to see what's happening in the Nile Basin in terms of energy production. You can see here, most of the energy produced is from natural gas. But big portion here is a hydropower. And hydropower, as I say, there are two issues here, or two big issues. The conflict between the nexus components, as I said, water for energy, energy for water, and the climate change. If we speak about climate change, Africa is not an exception, because what's happening in Africa in terms of increasing temperature over time is reflecting what is happening globally. So if the average global temperature increased by 0.8 degree, that's exactly happening also in Africa, more or less. I mean, we can go slightly less, slightly more, but the trend in the last 30 years is giving us an indication that Africa is facing also the global changes and the global warming. So here, what will be affected by the global warming when we speak about Africa, or even in general? So there will be high evaporation, which means when we have dams or reservoirs, we have to expect that more water will be evaporating in the future. And this has to be in our equation or calculations. Higher evapotranspiration, and evapotranspiration is the evaporation plus the transpiration from the crops, what we call evapotranspiration, which means countries or irrigation-based countries will need more water to irrigate their crops. So Egypt, Sudan, we will need more water in the future. And of course, all the other countries, because crops will require more water in the future. And hotter and longer dry periods will increase the drought risk. So there will be more periods of drought and also more floods. And the frequency of drought and flood will increase. And that's what we call the hydrological extremes. Sea level rise, but this is of course for the coastal countries, and definitely Egypt is one of the most countries that's going to suffer from the increase in the Mediterranean Sea and reducing the productivity of the Nile Delta by different means. I don't have time to go in details. But here, interesting relationship that was studied by one of the researchers is what is the relation in terms of energy sharing and energy exchange under the pressure of climate change? What will happen in the future? Whether we agree with the study or not, I don't agree completely with the study, but I found it kind of interesting, the idea itself, to study different climate change scenarios and the trade in terms of energy between the countries. So the blue line here is showing the cooperation is going to increase between Egypt and Sudan and then will drop with certain scenarios. But the yellow is the relation in energy relation between Egypt and Ethiopia will go up. So regardless the other countries, because we have Kenya and other countries, but here we focus on Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia. The three, they have a common future in terms of energy. So they have to think together what will happen with the energy trade between the three countries, especially under the conditions of climate change. So the NPI or the Nile Basin initiatives, I quoted here the text from one of the reports, speaking about strengthening the interrelationship or the cooperation in terms of agriculture trade, hydropower, developing joint mechanism for climate change mitigations and adaptations, research collaboration, monitoring programs together for climate change and meteorological data. So all of these are proposed nice type of collaborations. But on the ground, we have also to see what will happen with the new system or the new normal in the future with the climate change. And my focus today is completely not the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, but my focus today is in the entire system. This is a cascade of the dams that are existing on the ground, even if the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is not yet completed, but this is the situation right now. So what you can see here, the three dams in Sudan and one dam in Egypt. When everything is full, life is nice. But with the climate change, we said two things will happen. Hydrological extremes means more flood, more frequency of flooding, and more drought, which means that if your flood is coming from the left to the right, which is the flow direction, then the way you release water here will enormously affect the other dams. So this dam might be washed away by a wrong operation here during the flood time. So there should be here a type of agreement and collaboration between them. The worst is the case of drought. If you have a drought, especially, as I said, the climate change will bring to us prolonged drought, which means all these dams might reach a level of shut down water. So they have no water to release. And if we are not now discussing agreement on filling one dam and we have a challenge, what happens in this case of this climate change and prolonged drought to fill all these dams from the water coming from here? And if these 1, 2, 3, 4 will have to wait to this one to be completed, and these three will wait for the first and the second to be filled, and this two will wait for the first, second, third to be filled, these people will die in the prolonged drought till they receive water after 20 years, in this case of prolonged drought, taking 20 years as an example. So there is no way except following what was written here in the NPI report, multi-reservoir operation. So these reservoirs, they must be coordinated and operated together. And this is the engineering solution that's known in everywhere when you have a multi-reservoir system, in order to maximize, mitigate the extremes. And this one-dimensional operation is not an option anymore. So unilateralism has no chance here to be an option in the future, especially with climate change in the future. And honestly, why hydropower? I mean, in the future, this continent here, the entire Africa, if this is the amount of water available or the rainy area, this is the potential of solar energy. Why not we think in the future of moving to solar energy as a source of energy? So here, if you go to the relation, for example, here between water and food, as a second example, and then I will close, we have huge potential in the basin. We have a lot of rainfall. And you can see here the intensity of the rain. I'm not going to repeat because Vincent already mentioned this. You have 1,660 BCM, billion cubic meter of rainfall in the basin. In the 11 countries, you have 7,000 BCM. And the discussion around the 49 from the Blue Nile or for the 84 from the blue water here, should be really oriented the effort to the rain-fed agriculture, which is happening in very big areas in Africa. especially in the Nile Basin, but we need to see what is the problem with the rainfall. The problem with the rainfall is, again, the drought and the flood. If you have a period of drought that happens for a farmer, as you can see in the picture here, who is based in rainfall, then and if this drought coincide with the period of flowering stage, you're losing all the crops. You can lose it completely, as you can see here. So we need to find amount of water to help the farmers in the Nile Basin to overcome this drought period. And this is one of the examples, how can you store with a very low cost? If you go to the lowest area in the farm and you make this pond to store water, and this was done by one of my master students in Uganda when he was doing a research thesis. He just went there with $2,000 to start building a prototype and model. And it's known, I'm not saying that we created this, but the system we try to install here is when you have the rainfall during the rainy season, you can here settle the sediments in a reservoir, small one, and then take the water, the clean water, to another pond, which the one you saw in the picture, and then you cover it to avoid evaporation and also to avoid mosquitoes, because storing water in such countries has a problem of mosquitoes. And then we came up with the azolla as a coverage, green coverage for this area, and then you allow the farmers during the drought period to make use of the water, and you make the azolla here for biodiesel or feeding animals, home animals, or animals that are in a small scale farming, well known. In this specific pond, you can also grow fish. So if you grow fish here, it's even more efficient than the traditional aquaculture system, because in the traditional aquaculture system, you consume 25 cubic meters of water to produce 1 kilogram of fish. But with such a pond, you can intensify the productivity to produce, to consume 5 cubic meters only per kilogram fish. So you can raise the productivity from 250 kilogram to be 2.8 or 8 tons per hectare. So with this, we can minimize also the water consumed for the crops. So, and for the fish, because you are using the same amount of water for producing fish and using the waste of the fish, which is ammonia, transfer it to nitrate and use it as an irrigation water. So just like hitting two birds with one stone in a very low cost. I love low cost, low tech for African countries, and especially for the Nile Basin countries. So with this, you can reduce the water footprint of 1 kilogram fish from 30 or 25 cubic meter to only 3. You can even go further to be 0.3 cubic meter of water for 1 kilogram fish, but this is high tech. This is what we call recirculating aquaculture system. Of course, I don't recommend it for small scale farmers in Africa, but for commercial purposes in Africa could be interesting. So with this, you can minimize the virtual water of 1 kilogram, and then you reach the concept of producing more food with less water. And this is one of the examples that I wanted to cover. Anyway, I just want to conclude that this interrelationship between water, energy, and food will bring to us new dimensions that will help us a lot to understand the connections and try to make use of them instead of having conflict, to have better opportunities for the sustainability in the Nile Basin. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hani. Dr. Seifu's presentation will be next. Kala, I believe that's going to be a recording, right?
Yes, 1 moment, please.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, my talk is about the circumstances underlying infrastructure and institution development in Ethiopia, keeping the context of the Nile, and the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Some of you may recall 1985 in Ethiopia. Northern Ethiopia was struck by drought and subsequent starvation, famine, and death. The drought and the starvation affected millions of people in northern Ethiopia. The Live Aid show was organized by singers, actors, and artists to help Ethiopia overcome the challenge of the time. My talk is centered around what Ethiopia and Friends of Ethiopia did over the last 30 years to overcome the water, food poverty challenge Ethiopia faces since time immemorial. The GERD, or the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam, is the most significant component, but not the only effort that Ethiopia exerts to lift herself and her people out of now epitomized poverty and starvation. Civil war ended in Ethiopia in 1991. Prior to this time, contemporary and historical rulers of Ethiopia had the vision of building dams on the Nile. You may recall the USBR support to Ethiopia to assess its water resources in 1950s. In 1993, President Meles Zenawi met with President Hosni Mubarak of Egypt. The two parties agreed verbally on the necessity of the conservation and protection of the Nile waters. In this regard, they agreed to undertake to consult and cooperate in projects that are mutually advantageous, such as projects that would enhance the volume of flow and reduce the loss of Nile waters through comprehensive and integrated development schemes. Zenawi's visit to Egypt coincided with the formulation of Ethiopia's ADLI, ADLI, Agriculture Development Land Industrialization, and the development partners financed ESRDF program called Ethiopian Social Rehabilitation and Development Fund. The two programs aim to rehabilitate rural livelihood through small-scale irrigation and rural water supply schemes. Hundreds of microdams ranging in size from 0.5 to 2 kilometers squares were constructed in Tigray and some parts of Ethiopia between 1994 and 2002 under the two programs. Coincidentally to the ongoing ADLI program, the World Bank President Joseph Stiglitz visited Ethiopia in 1997 and met with Prime Minister Zenawi. The two counterparts talked the same language or similar language: eradicating poverty, pro-poor growth, environmental rehabilitation, protection of basic services, etc. The meeting between the two and the learning from successes and failures of ADLI gave birth to what we call the Sustainable Development and Poverty Reduction Strategy, called SDP-RP. Well, of course, the meeting had also other benefits for Zenawi. He came to forefront of global debate around poverty reduction. As a result of the SDP-RP, several thousands, in fact 45,000 ponds were built in Ethiopia. Small-scale weirs, small dams were also constructed. 5,000 hectares of land put under irrigation under the program. And this is very, very small when compared to 18 million hectares of land which is under rainfed agriculture. Hundreds and thousands of hectares of land, degraded land, has been rehabilitated. Nevertheless, drought struck again in year 2002, and people have starved again, though the scale of starvation was not similar to 1985. The drought once more exposed the insufficiency of the SDP-RP program. Drought continued to date. Human days is largely reduced, but impact on socioeconomic outcomes continued. Drought impacts health, education, migration, conflict, GDP, jobs, etc. Consequently, Ethiopia became the hotspot of water security think tanking. Development partners recognized hydrological variability seriously. It seriously undermines Ethiopia's growth, resilience of communities, and perpetuates poverty. The colored figure shows, given similar level of hydrologic variability, countries with large storage per capita show higher income compared to those with low water storage per capita. The figure in the right-hand side show how cumulative investment in water infrastructure and institutions would move the country from low-level equilibrium trap and put it in on growth trajectory. Once the inflection point is reached, that is the red point, even small investment can bring high return on investment. Ethiopia's development aspiration since 2005 is to endeavor to put herself in the, on this inflection point. The development aspiration is to break the hydrologic hostage situation. Ethiopia is coined as, or the term hostage of hydrology is coined as for Ethiopia now. Ethiopia is a hostage of hydrology. Several international reports you see here, publications, think tank, blogs, etc., came to conclude that the vitality of water storage, not the type of storage we have seen under SCDPRP, the small ones, but large infrastructure development is required for Ethiopia to overcome the challenges that the country faces and the country and her people faces. Parallel to the ongoing economic growth and development efforts, the Nile Basin Initiative was launched in 1999 with the aim of evolving into a basin organization and formulating a comprehensive framework agreement on waters of the Nile. Remember, 40% of the land and 60% of Ethiopia's water resources is in the Nile Basin. All its water or river basins, except one basin, are transboundary. This means Ethiopia's aspiration to grow and feed its people is strongly tied to the favorability of external environment. This adds complexity to its development efforts. Now, coming back to the dismal outcome of SDPRP, the program that has been running for now about a decade, Ethiopia and her friends and development partners agree to follow a new economic paradigm named PASDEP and subsequently GTP, Growth and Transformation Plan. Now, Ethiopia must follow a two-legged approach. This is in 2005. A two-legged approach, one foot in the continuation of the previous pro-poor programs, and the second one on accelerating economic growth through massive investment in water and other large infrastructure, such as roads, railways, etc. We now start to witness or to see roads and water conservation structures parallel to each other. This is after 2005. Now, let me bring you back to the Nile Basin Initiative. For about 10 years, the Nile Basin Initiative brokered discussions, negotiations among the riparian countries. There was to be a major breakthrough in 2009. The text you see in the right-hand side is quoted from Professor van der Zag, AHE Delft, the Netherlands. According to him, as part of, for instance, the joint multi-purpose project spearheaded by the World Bank and the Nile Basin Initiative, cascades of 4 reservoirs were initially proposed along the Nile, Blue Nile, in Ethiopia after 10 years of negotiations and discussions between the riparian countries, particularly Sudan, Ethiopia, and Egypt. However, a new Egyptian water minister who came to power around the end of 2009, at the final moment when all the lights were green for World Bank financing of these 4 infrastructure to be built on the Nile, the minister said, we don't accept, and no. This is according to Professor van der Zag. You can see details in the YouTube video provided here. Then, Zenawi, Ethiopia's leader, has to go for the largest of the 4 reservoirs using nationally available financial resources. Remember, Ethiopia up until 2008 was not open for any form of international investment. But the advice came from the actors and the global actors that Ethiopia must open its economy to foreign direct investment. So Ethiopia started the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam in 2011 and started to open up its economy to international investment, as a result of which we see a number of roads, railways, tramways, and other infrastructure in Ethiopia nowadays. Zenawi has to mobilize money from local sources, bonds, shares, donations, voluntary contributions, telethons, etc. Ethiopia adds now the GERD into other water infrastructure under construction. Gibe 1, Gibe 2, Ganale, Kesem, Tendaho, Rib. These are the dams, other dams in other parts of the country. Surprisingly, the pre-dam think tanking now changed its tone and its subject from development, poverty, starvation narrative now to hydrohegemony, national security, politics, renaissance, etc. Some assert Ethiopia built the dam to hold hegemony on the others, on the regional countries. Others allege the then ruling party using the infrastructure development as a way of legitimizing power over the people. So the tone has changed substantially. Regardless, a breakthrough was reached in 2015 when the 3 leaders from the 3 countries, Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, signed the Declaration of Principles. Details can be found in the net what the Declaration of Principles was. This was later reaffirmed in 2018 when Abiy, Prime Minister Abiy, the current Prime Minister, and Sisi met in Cairo. The 2 leaders agreed to resume talks and discuss the GERD filling procedures. The most challenging time came in 2019 as the first stage filling was about to start. Sudan, which sided with Ethiopia, made inexplicable U-turn in 2019. Escalation of all front happened, and regardless, 2 of the 5 stage filling happened in 2020 and 2021 without causing significant harm. The first power generation is now expected to start in December 2021, which is next month. So, what is in the perspective? Ethiopia's dam is embedded, or the dam is embedded in Ethiopia's aspiration to release itself from hydrology hostage situation. Development partners must see this reality. Ethiopia already started to witness the benefits of infrastructure development. Reduction of poverty, measurable. Increase in income, measurable. And basic services. So we start to see the benefits, and then we start to see the countries, moving toward that inflection point that I've shown you in one of my previous slides. The countries involved in the Nile Basin region need to depoliticize the matter and emphasize on development vision. The countries must come back to the NBI and craft their way through the water challenge they face. And then there is a lot of option to seek the abundance of technical solutions to overcome water scarcity, effective use of rains, groundwater, use of groundwater, seawater desalination, brackish water use, water quality management, water food energy nexus, water footprint, monitoring, storage including in managed aquifer recharge, technological innovations and applications required an institutional framework. And currently, the most viable institutional framework is the Nile Basin Initiative, and this Basin Initiative must be supported, and we need to go back to the Nile Basin Initiative and craft our way through these opportunities and challenges that we are facing. Much.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Seifu. And our next speaker.
Just one correction, Vince. The meeting between Sisi and Abiy happened in Russia, not in Cairo.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Seifu. So next we'll have Dr. David Kramer from speaking to us from Las Vegas, I believe. David, you're on.
Thank you. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
My slides are visible.
Yes, they are.
Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm David Kramer. I am a professor at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and president of the International Association of Hydrogeologists. And my topic today is to do some comparisons between the Nile River Basin and the Colorado River Basin in the United States. There's contrast and there's comparisons between the two. The Colorado is a much smaller river and it covers less area than the Nile River Basin, but it has many jurisdictions that it goes through. Whereas the Nile goes through 10 African countries, the Colorado River flows through 7 US states and 22 federally recognized Native American tribes, national wildlife refuges, national parks, recreation areas, and many other different uses throughout the length of the river. The Colorado River supplies water to 40 million people, whereas the Nile supports about 270 million people, or about 20% of the African population. The irrigation, though, is pretty large in the Colorado River Basin. It's 3.5% of the land area of the basin, whereas in the Nile Basin, it's a little less than 2%. So the trends in climate are not entirely clear. It is warming, but the discharge of the Nile River is very, very seasonal, and it's subject to water extraction along the river. There have been severe droughts in different years. The Colorado River, however, has had over 20 years of a fairly severe drought. And how the Colorado River states in the United States and Mexico handle the drought is an interesting contrast. Should go back into the history a little bit of the Colorado River Basin. The Colorado River was divided up in the 1920s, and it was divided between different states in the United States along the Colorado River. There are 7 states, and it flows eventually into Mexico. In the lower right-hand side, you can see a map, and it shows the states of Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and California. There was nobody living in Nevada, so they got a very small portion of the Colorado River in the decision in the 1920s as to how to divide the river up. You can see the percentages of the river on the left that were given to different states. California had a lot of farming going on, so it got a very large share, and also Mexico got a share of the river. The major problem was in the 1910s, it was not recognized at the time, but the river had been flowing very high. And so they thought they had more water in the river than annually flows. And so the river was over-allocated, which was a major problem and continues to be a problem as we move into the future. Like Africa, the population growth has been immense. This is a satellite shot of Las Vegas, Nevada, which is right off the Colorado River in December of 1985. Also, you can see off to the right of the shot, Lake Mead, which is along the Colorado River. Lake Mead is the largest reservoir in the United States. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to the present day from this shot from 1985. And not only should you keep your eye on how Las Vegas has grown, but off to the right, you might notice how Lake Mead shrinks in size. So I'm about to switch over now. If you look at Lake Mead on the right, you can see a tremendous change in the area of Lake Mead and the tremendous population growth of the Las Vegas metropolitan area. This is a problem throughout the basin. Just to take one arm of the Lake Mead on the Colorado River, you can see that from 2000, when the lake was brim full of water, to today, there has been a tremendous decrease in the amount of water available in the Colorado River. So we've had a drought now for 20 plus years. There have been one or two above average years, but only one or two. So Lake Mead, this is Lake Mead, the intake area at Hoover Dam. You can see that the water has declined, what we call the bathtub ring. Lake Mead is now 34% full from its overall capacity. And Lake Powell, another major lake along the Colorado River, is 29% full. So the lake has declined 50 meters below what we call full pool or full capacity. And then the drought is not relenting. In the water year that's just passed, the runoff into the Colorado River system was 33% of normal. So a severe drought is occurring right now in the Colorado River area. So what agreements have gone on lately, and how are people trying to handle this? Well, negotiations and agreements between the different states and the US and Mexico have been going on throughout time. There was a major agreement in 1944, which set the stage for how the US and Mexico would handle different water issues. I haven't mentioned groundwater, which is very important. There is some transboundary groundwater from US to Mexico, and that's another thing that has been negotiated in the past. Groundwater, as many of you know, is very closely linked to surface water. If you diminish one, you can diminish the other. If you pollute one, you can pollute the other. The agreement then in 2007, there were some storage sharing guidelines when people realized that they were in a drought. And then finally in 2012, there was a US and Mexico agreement on the restoration of the Colorado River Delta, which you can see over here in the right-hand photo, and infrastructure and water sharing agreements for the river. Just quickly mentioning the Colorado River Delta, so much of the Colorado River is used as it flows to Mexico that by the time the water is supposed to get to the Delta, it's pretty much non-existent. It's all diverted. And so what was once a vibrant ecosystem is pretty much a dead zone in the Colorado River Delta. So in the lower left, you can see a revegetation process that's going on associated with the agreement in 2012. Lake Mead is the largest reservoir in the United States, and therefore it's been used as a bellwether for what's going on and a basis for drought contingency plans. Because the drought has gone on for so long, there are specific problems to Lake Mead. Las Vegas, the city of Las Vegas takes its water. Several million people live there. 90% of its water is from Lake Mead in the Colorado River system. And as the lake declines, there are problems with the intakes. For example, the full spillway gate elevation, the US is not on the metric system, unfortunately, in many ways, but the full spillway gate elevation is 1,221 feet above mean sea level. If the water were to decline to 1,050 feet, intake number 1 would lose its siphon and be inoperative. As the water would decline to 1,000-foot elevation, the intake number 2 would be gone. In recent years, a third intake was drilled and tunneled to be able to get water from a deeper depth, but again, at essentially about 895 feet above sea level. As the lake were to decline, that would also become inoperative and what we call dead pool. Water could no longer go through Hoover Dam and generate power. So as a result of this, in 2013, it was determined that the guidelines in 2012 were not going to be enough. And so it took 6 years, but a drought contingency plan was put together between all the states and Mexico in 2019. That plan expires in 2026, but essentially it goes through a system where as the lake declines, more and more stringent water restrictions throughout the basin kick in. So the way that works is if you look off on the left-hand side of this graphic that you're seeing here, the Colorado River basin is outlined, and circled is Lake Mead, which is used as the determining factor for drought restrictions. And specifically, the level of the water as it declines is the measure of different drought restrictions. And so the drought restrictions you can see for tier 1 restrictions, when the water comes down to 1,090 feet above sea level, one set of water restrictions kicks in. At 1,075 feet as it declines, tier 1, and then you can see tier 2. This is a cross section of the lake here and Hoover Dam, and you can see as the water level were to decline, you have tier 2, tier 2B, and tier 3 water restrictions, which are increasingly severe water cutbacks for all the different states. It should be noted that as of this weekend, the water level in Lake Mead has been declining, and it's already at 1,065 and a little bit more feet above mean sea level. And that's about 50 meters below full pool or full capacity. And so the tier 1 water restrictions have already kicked in, and states are having to cut back. So what are some of the solutions? Water harvesting, has been mentioned before, is something that's been used in the Nile River Basin for millennia. Some archaeologists have found that over 2,000 years ago, for example, in northwestern Egypt, there have been water harvesting systems. This is a photograph of the systems and a map showing the different wadis that have been associated with some of the water restrictions. The water harvesting systems. So the idea of harvesting water and put it underground is sometimes called managed aquifer recharge or artificial recharge systems. And there are many advantages to this. It provides a tool for basin management, and it's very flexible as far as the operational flexibility when you put water underground. Essentially, you take surface water and you store it, sort of like money in the bank. It's water underground, and you can provide an emergency reserve in case of water facility failure, reduces the pumping costs through less lift, because the water table is higher. It's not as deep to go for water, and so it also reduces electrical costs, and it more or less stabilizes the groundwater levels in the principal aquifer. For example, in the case of where I live in Nevada, if Lake Mead were to get a toxic algae bloom, where 90% of our water comes from, we could then go to the system in the groundwater system and the recharge. The city of Las Vegas has been recharging water for over 30 years. This is an example of a pump that is a reversible pump. In the winter, when water use is low, water is taken from the Colorado River and pumped underground and stored. In the summer, when water use is very, very high, this pump reverses and pumps water out of the ground for water use throughout the city. And so there are numerous wells of this kind throughout. This is used when the aquifer systems are rather deep. When you have the right geology and aquifer systems are rather shallow, you can use a surface recharge spreading basin system. And this is used in several places in the southwestern United States in the Colorado River Basin. But it's also very applicable to many places in the Nile River Basin. In this graphic, you can see on the left a surface spreading recharge basin and water then with the arrows infiltrating into the different aquifers. In this particular graphic, the ocean is off to the right of the slide, and many places in the world have saltwater intrusion problems that are in coastal areas. With a rising sea level associated with climate change, some authors have called this the leading edge of climate change. Saltwater intrusion is increasing in some areas, and by doing artificial recharge, you can actually forestall saltwater intrusion in coastal areas. So this is one possible solution that could be increased probably in the Nile River Basin. There is maintenance that's associated with this. Sometimes fine material settles on the bottom of the spreading basin and will reduce infiltration. So these things have to be maintained, but it's one thing that can help the situation. So the whole idea is you take rainwater and you, instead of letting it run off, you collect it and put it underground. Another thing that can be used for water supply is the reuse of wastewater. Globally, it's estimated that about 80% of global wastewater, that is water from industries and from sewage, is released into the environment without adequate treatment, and this creates pollution problems in our surface water. To be able to take this water and to treat it to a higher standard and then reuse it in many different forms in agriculture, in irrigation, but also in industrial processes, particularly for cooling industrial processes and power generation, is something that really is a strong water conservation element. It's been used in the Colorado River Basin extensively. So the reuse of wastewater is one key element in the fight against drought. So other approaches and plans that might be applicable to the Nile River that are used, as I mentioned, wastewater can be used for cooling power production, and there's actually several examples. One prime example is in Arizona. The city of Phoenix takes water through something called the Central Arizona Project Canals from the Colorado River, and their wastewater for the city is actually used to cool a nuclear power plant just outside the city. There's a scheme called intentionally created surplus, and that's where different states are conserving water to be used at a later date. This water conservation allows the reservoirs to fill more than they normally would, or be diminished less than they normally would, but it also allows artificial recharge, that is managed aquifer recharge, to occur. There also financially are drought mitigation funds being developed. If the drought intensifies, the idea of having a financial base to address problems that arise due to the drought is an interesting thing to consider for different countries and different states in the United States. The U.S. and Mexico have been negotiating and trying to reach agreement on considering a desalination of seawater from the Sea of Cortez or the Gulf of California. The Colorado River flows from more or less northeast to southwest and empties in the Gulf of California, which is also called the Sea of Cortez. And the Colorado River actually gets saltier as it moves down toward the sea. There's already some desalination that goes on near the U.S.-Mexico border to ensure that there's fresh water going to Mexico. But the idea of doing a mass-scale desalination on the Gulf of California is an idea that's being developed right now. And lastly, it's important to have adaptive management. And in the agreement of 2019 for the Drought Contingency Plan, it was noted that if the drought intensifies faster than anybody thinks it will, and Lake Mead drops to a level of 1,030 feet above sea level, which is very, very low, it will immediately kick in additional consultation between the states and Mexico to try and solve that problem. So that's pretty much what we're doing in the Colorado River Basin. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and I'll finish with a mural that I saw in Botswana when I was traveling there, that certainly water is important to everybody. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, David, and thank you to all the speakers. We'll now move on to the question and answer portion, and just keep the questions coming in. Let me begin with the first question, and I'm going to direct this to both Dr. Seifu and Dr. Hani. And the question is, can someone provide an overview of artificial recharge practices in the Nile Basin countries, such as aquifer storage recovery and managed aquifer recharge that Dr. David Kramer talked about? If I can hear from Dr. Seifu first, and then Dr. Hani. Go ahead.
Yes, Vince, I would say in terms of water conservation structures, program scale or supported by finance and at larger scale is already happening in Ethiopia, under that earlier program called SDPRP. But it is not, the technology is not in such a way that storage of water happens in the groundwater. That program aims to store water in the soil zone. One advantage of, one advantage in Ethiopia is that this kind of work is already happening as mainstream development program. So modifications to it can happen. It's a welcome. And I would say there are a few research trying to demonstrate that even these soil water conservation practices has already increased groundwater storage in many places in Ethiopia. But yes, managed aquifer recharge is a good option that can be sought in Ethiopia and elsewhere in the region. But we need know-how, particularly some of the designs are a bit complex. There are also challenges, like for instance, incrustation of the infiltration basin, how to handle that, water quality challenges, how to handle that. This requires, some sort of technical, collaboration between the countries within the Nile as well as internationally. Yeah, back to you, Vince.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Hani?
Yeah, thank you, Vince, very much.
Yes.
Groundwater recharge is, of course, a very interesting application for the countries that have intensive rainfall, like Ethiopia, like other countries that I showed in the map when I was discussing the rainfall distribution. In Egypt, there are some constructions that were built also recently because of the water scarcity problem that catch in the area of Sinai, in the area of Upper Egypt, when there is some rainfall in the winter, that to protect the people, at the same time to store the water to be recharged in the underground. But I don't know, Vincent, if you allow me to add some of the ideas, because I thought today was not the topic of the GERD, but I realized that we had a long presentation on the GERD story. So if you allow me, Vincent, to also give feedback on this, because I honestly cannot leave this. The issue with the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is not the issue that the minister who came and said we don't agree after a long time of negotiation. There was also offers from Egypt to contribute in building the dam itself, like what's happening in Tanzania right now, and to share the cost, but also share the benefit with everyone. So this is what happened. And also, there is no such a dam with a huge reservoir of 74 billion cubic meter is built without environmental and socio-economical studies. So there was also in 2013, the IPOE, or the International Panel of Experts, which came up with a report that these studies are necessary. This was 2013, almost now 10 years, and we don't have this study. It makes the downstream countries, that's what makes the downstream countries are very worried. And the DOB that was mentioned, signed as a milestone, and a good move signed in 2015 is not respected. So there is a unilateral filling happening on the ground right now, and first phase and second phase, and this is violating the signed DOB, because this has to be a 3 countries agreement on the filling and the operation rules as stated in the DOB to be followed. And also the history, what happened with Giba 3 that was mentioned as a dam of a good development for Ethiopia. This dam has caused enormous impact on the Lake Turkana, and Lake Turkana, if you go to the UNESCO website, is now World Heritage at risk, and it's written on the website of UNESCO that this is because of the Ethiopian dam Giba 3. So all of these are issues that makes the downstream countries are worried, and the issue is really much more bigger than being a minister who said we don't want to proceed. Thank you.
Okay. Let me see. All right. I'm going to go to a question. This will probably be to Dr. Hani. Looking at the water basin management issues, is it important to add the stakeholders in the water food nexus to the manning of interstate commissions? And I hope I've phrased this question correctly. And I think probably Dr. Hani, you were talking about the water food nexus, so probably we'll direct that to you. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, Vincent. Thank you also for the question. Definitely. Any decision-making process that involves such multi-criteria, such as water, energy, food, and under the water, there are a lot of criteria to be considered, or indicators like water quantity, water quality, and also the energy accessibility, reliability, and we speak about the food, speak about food security, and food security means accessibility, stability on the long run, affordability. So all of these are indicators that needs to be considered when we think of scenario. I mentioned the scenario of multi-reservoir operation. What is the impact of such multi-reservoir operation on the nexus dimensions? And under each of these water, energy, food, we have the list of criteria. I mentioned some of them, and you need to involve the people as well, because the community will have different opinion than the politicians, and the politicians will have different opinion than the engineers, and the engineers will disagree with the social economists, or they will disagree with the ecologists. So all these stakeholders, they have to be considered. And if you take the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the stakeholders were not asked in the downstream what will be the impact on their life or in their socio-economical business in the future. Thank you.
Right, so the next question, I'll direct to David Kramer. Are there any agreements that are already established between Mexico and the U.S. to divvy up the Colorado River?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, well, the first agreement was in the 1920s, 100 years ago, and Mexico has a definite portion of the Colorado River that it's entitled to. The water quality was an issue for a while, and about 1970, during the Nixon administration in the United States, an agreement was reached to have a desalination project on the border with Mexico, so the water that was supplied to Mexico would be not too salty that it would kill the crops. But there have been modifications throughout time and negotiations throughout time with the United States and Mexico. For example, just a couple of years ago, a small earthquake disrupted diversion canals in Mexico and actually damaged them. And so an agreement was reached very quickly to store Mexico's water in the Colorado River system dams in the United States while the diversion canals were being repaired. And then it was used after that repair went on. So there are all sorts of different agreements that are going on. Again, one of the issues is transboundary groundwater. It's kind of interesting that although there are concerns of the surface water of the Nile River, that the Nubian Aquifer, shared by 4 countries, actually does have an agreement in place. There are literally hundreds of transboundary aquifers around the world, and only about 4 or 5 of them have transboundary agreements. And the Nubian Aquifer is one of them. And so there are some advances being made in the Nile River Basin. But yes, there are agreements between Mexico and the United States as far as how much water will be used, what the water quality is, and in the drought contingency plan, how the reduction in the available water due to the continuing drought will be handled by both the United States and Mexico.
All right, thank you. I'm going to direct this to Dr. Seifu. Has there been any information exchanges or visits between both MBI and the Colorado River Basin?
Between what and the Colorado, you said?
The Nile Basin Initiative, I think, yeah.
I'm not aware of any, but I'm aware of a visit by NBI people to the Danube in Europe.
Right.
And well, Danube is not in a similar hydrology situation. And yes, I think that is, if there is some financing for them to bring them to this, area, it would be very interesting to, for the decision makers and for the executives in the Nile Basin initiative to visit. It would be an interesting.
Vincent, if I could also say something about that. There are some similarities. The Colorado River Basin has areas that have a lot of water, and then it goes through dry lands as well. Where I live, it's on the edge of the Mojave Desert. We get about maybe 100 millimeters of rain a year on the average, although for last year, it was about 30 millimeters of rain, and we went 240 days without any rainfall. Also, the flow of the Colorado River has been, through isotopic methods, has been shown to be over 50% from base flow, from groundwater. So the groundwater surface water interaction is very important. And as the drought continues, the water tables do decline, and it dries up springs and potentially impacts ecosystems as well. And so there are sort of analogies that go on. I know that Egypt, for example, is developing its groundwater resources in concert with surface water supplies.
Thanks, David. All right, so that brings kind of a follow-on question to what David just mentioned. Somebody asked, are there any reaches along the Nile River where the river is losing? That is recharging shallow aquifers along the river, like naturally. And I would direct that to Dr. Hani and Dr. Seifu.
Yeah, I think it's well known in Egypt that as you know, when you look to the map, you see the Nile Delta is having at least 1/3 of the Egyptian population, and this 1/3 of the Egyptian population, they are using partially the groundwater that's leaked from the river. So the river is recharging the shallow aquifer, and the farmers are pumping from the near area of the river, which in this case, the Nile Delta. So this is happening, and it's also very well used. And it's not only the river itself, but the tributaries and the secondary open channels that are irrigating the areas. Yes, the government now is having a huge national project to line the canals, but even without lining, the water that's leaked from the canals is pumped by the farmers in the near areas and reused directly in irrigation. And the water used for irrigation is infiltrating under the ground. And we have in the Nile Delta area underground pipelines, which we call the drainage pipelines. And these drainage pipelines are collecting the water that's excess or additional water that the crop is not using, collecting it to the open channel drains, and then it's circulated. So for example, the case in Egypt is a closed loop system. So whatever is infiltrated is reused again for irrigation.
Yeah, Vince, if I may follow on that,
Please.
maybe before answering that question, a bit of clarification regards the back and forth about my presentation, and then Dr. Hani's clarification. I think the polemic is not very important, and I see the tone. There are opportunities to explore further. Okay, it is not about who is right and who is wrong, and the things are out there. And for those technical people, researchers, things are out there, and then they can explore what is happening or what has happened in the Nile. I quoted from Professor van der Zak, and one can ask that question. But coming to this groundwater surface water interaction, the situation changes as you move from the Ethiopian highland into the Nile Delta. In the Ethiopian highlands, the stream systems, the streams are mostly gaining streams. So they are groundwater fed streams. But as you go into the Sudan, because of this long history of drying over the last 5,000 years, following the desertification of the Sahara, or how you call it, the groundwater level, the regional groundwater level is much lower than the river. So the river is like a perched system flowing on the top, and then it loses to different depressions as you go down. And there is an estimate on that, the volume of water that goes into the shallow groundwaters in Sudan by someone based in USGS, Gabriel Sana and his team. There is about 10 billion meter cube of annually unaccounted water that is lost probably into the aquifer systems. And fortunately enough, there is some conjunctive use currently happening along the banks of the Nile River in Sudan. They are irrigating maybe 70,000 hectares and even more. And also the practice in Egypt, in the Nile Delta, it's part of that groundwater surface water connections. Actually, the stream water, the Nile recharges the aquifer, and then they are using that aquifer to irrigate really large surfaces in Egypt. And this is very encouraged, conjunctive use of surface and groundwater. Yes, the river is recharging the aquifer in Egypt and in Sudan, but in the Ethiopian part, it is an integral part of the river flow, because it is more, the groundwater is connected and feeding the streams, and that is what I can say, Vince.
Okay, thank you. The next question is regarding development groups and NGOs that are very hands-on when it comes to working on water issues in the Nile River Basin and around the world. The question is, how can scientific researchers play a more active role in contributing to these efforts, and what topics, disciplines related to today's discussion have the greatest need for innovative research? So it's a rather long question, but a very interesting one. I think that's something we should probably have. Let's start with David and then go to Hani and then go to Seifu. I think the contributions from all three would be useful to this interesting question. I'll repeat it if I need to. It was long.
Thank you, Vince. A very interesting question. I was amazed at the number of NGOs that do work around the Nile River Basin when I've done work there. Some NGOs actually can do more harm than good if they're not well directed. There's so many pitfalls and ways that you can go wrong in trying to put in water systems and help communities. For example, you can put in a perfectly good well that is well sealed, surface water pollution doesn't get down. It can be very well needed in a community. You could have good water quality. You could do everything right. You could make sure it's sustainable and the community can fix it if it breaks down, so it lasts for years. But if you put it in the backyard of somebody that the community hates, you can create a water war that can last generations. So there's so many ways that you can get it wrong when you're trying to get it right. The NGOs also can be directed by hydrogeologists in some of the water projects. For example, you can put in a well that can dry up a spring that has been used by people and ecosystems for millennia if you don't do the hydrogeology in a correct fashion. And so there are many, many pitfalls, but there's also a great opportunity in water projects to increase things. The interaction between professionals and people who just want to do good things is an important connection that can be improved actually in future efforts.
Thank you. Let's go to Dr. Hani.
Thank you very much. In terms of the role of researchers, I think there is a lot to be done, at least showing the politicians that there is a huge potential for collaboration in the basin. There is a huge amount of water that's enough to everyone. So it's not about shortage of water, it's about managing the water. So the issue is a management issue. It's not really a water scarcity. There is a scarcity in one location, and there is a water availability in the other. And then the role of the researchers is to show the decision makers that there are solutions and they have to come together. There should be a collaboration, and there should be a clear evidence-based solutions, multi-reservoir operation, climate change impact, and without working the researchers together in the basin, there is no solution for climate change without being an adaptation strategy that really commit all the countries together. And it is our role as researchers to put solutions on the table. And I will close this and hand over to my colleague, Dr. Seifu. But before I hand over, also, I will continue the ping pong. And he is talking about Professor van der Zaak. I will put on the screen, I will not comment it, what was said about the GIBA and what was the reaction, also from the literature and also from the sources available to everyone to read. So thank you very much.
Yeah, okay. That was a great question, Vince. So my answer is that the Nile region is sort of very unique in a sense that elitism, political elitism is, the norm. So for instance, in this doesn't preclude Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan, in all countries. So elites come to power. So the political sphere is suffocated by elites wanting to impose or gain from, to access resources. And you see politicians, Dr. X, Dr. Y, Professor, even you see Professor X, Professor Y in, playing the politics. So what I can say or observe as an observer is that scientists in the region, Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, are not putting the correct information to the politicians because they are the politicians themselves. So this must be revisited. We have to kind of undergo a metanoia, mind transformation. And this is a very difficult situation, the debates, the escalations, around this dam construction, storage construction. It's not about the real issue. It is about, who has the largest voice, who has access to the government circle, etc. I think the first thing that the researchers have to do is detach themselves from the politics and focus on the techniques as much as possible. So yeah, that is what I can say, but there are a lot of scopes, a lot of possibilities of applying this technical knowledge to solve the problem the region is facing. I'm not sure if I've expressed myself well, but elitism is the biggest problem in that region. And the fight is not between the political level only, but between wrong informations, false information, falsehood. This is a big challenge in that region, Vince. Okay. I'm pointing finger at everybody in all countries. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. All right, so I guess we still have a few minutes. I have a question which I think maybe we can close with, and I want to thank everybody for their patience and their great questions. It's been a very, very educational webinar. What's the prognosis? And I'm going to direct this to Dr. I think everybody can chime in, all of the four speakers. And also, if you can put your cameras on the speakers, I think that would help. What's the prognosis for developing a Nile River Basin Authority for managing river allocation, such as we have in other parts of the world, the Okavango River Basin, the Limpopo River Basin Authority, Zambezi, etc. So I'm going to start with, since you're already on the mic, Seifu, I'm going to start with you, and let's work our way across to Dr. Hani, Dr. David, and to Lang.
Yes, Vince, the Nile Basin Initiative has been established in 1999 with the aim or the vision of moving into a basin organization. And that has not been successful as of yet, after nearly how many years, more than 20 years, it has not been successful. And still it is an initiative. And regardless, in many African countries, we see already, the Niger Basin Initiative, the Niger, for instance, now they are even moving beyond the traditional water allocation, dam management, flood control, etc. They are moving now into conjunctive management of surface and groundwaters in the basin and beyond the basin, in transboundary Tauden, Illumiden groundwater basin. So there are some very good progresses in other regions, in other basins in Africa, and the Nile stands out. And one has to question why this is happening. So it is partly related to what I've mentioned in the previous, intervention, kind of confrontational approaches to the management of the water resources. But I think the opportunity is still there. The Nile Basin Initiative is still functioning. It has very good technical capacity, maybe the most, in terms of technical capacity of the staff and their operations, it is very well organized. And I think the opportunity is there to kind of all the countries come to it. I think two countries are currently not part of it. You know which countries they are, obviously. But I think that is that will help a lot. Instead of moving the problem outside the context of shared development, shared vision. For instance, how can you implement a energy, food, water nexus without having an institution across these countries? So opting for a new institution will create its own other problems. So let's capitalize on the existing institution and build from there. But I think our partners, development partners in the region, the think tanks must support, building trust between these countries. Thank you very much, Vince.
All right, thanks. Let's move over to Dr. Honey, and then David, and then Lang. Yeah.
I think I will be very short, but I'll maybe start from where Dr. Siu ended and saying that that two countries are not part of it. If we speak about technical issues and technical solutions, and I maybe agree with the only thing I agree with him today is that the scientists are not putting the right information in front of the decision makers. I agree with him on this. So if we keep things at the technical level, technical not necessarily engineering, but it could be also socio-economical, but pure from the scientific point of view and the honest and ethical based science, I think there are solutions and problems can be solved. When we sat together in a separate room and we started discussing technicalities, we reach an agreement. But once we are in front of the public, once we are speaking to the politicians, everyone is trying to show that I am right and you are wrong. And that's a big problem in Africa, actually. It's not only in the Nile Basin. And I'm African. I'm not just saying, I'm considering myself 100% African. So we need to put technical solutions first. But when you come and make things more political, and then there is a perspective from the technical point of view that there are upstream countries and there are downstream countries. And of course, the majority will be the upstream countries, that they can reach an agreement that could be very harmful for the downstream, and the downstream will be left alone. If you speak, for example, about voting approach, but if you speak about technical solutions for the problem, then there will be a common solution that everyone get benefit out of it. As it was mentioned, the nexus approach. How can you do it? How can you do it without having one entity that's going to solve these issues, without speaking about majority solution that's fitting the majority? That definitely every solution will fit the upstream and will not fit the downstream. The GERD, for example, one of the very clear examples that could be very interesting for the upstream countries. Everyone wants to build a dam and then leave the downstream surviving or starving. So even if there are 1 or 2 countries against the other 8 or 9, that's not a solution. So it has to be technical solution and fair in order to be really a real initiative that should be respected and appreciated from everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Negotiation between so many different political entities is really a difficult thing. And it constantly needs to be updated. For example, in the Colorado River Basin, very often the religious beliefs of the Native American tribes and some of the water sources they used were not considered in the early decisions. And now we're constantly revising and improving our water agreements. We're also trying to adjust to drought conditions, but with so many countries in the Nile Basin, it's really, really a challenge to do. I guess there are no simple solutions. I agree that technical solutions are important. I know that there's a lot of mathematical modeling that's being done with reservoir use in the Nile River system to show different water uses and different amounts of storage and what that would mean to the other water users along the Nile River. But it is not a simple problem. I'd like also to thank Vincent All and the other speakers in the panel. It's really been delightful speaking with you today.
Thanks, David. And Lang, you have the last. You have the last.
Yes, I want to say it may be counterintuitive, but I think actually the time is very ripe for a new type of negotiation, taking it out of the political realm where much of the focus is now on the internal strife that's going on and the border strife, and frame it as how are we going to counter environmental degradation, put it in that. And you know, my candidate to do this are the Nordic countries. Norway especially has always been involved in the Nile River Basin Initiative, and they don't carry much of the bad baggage that others do, and they carry a lot of good baggage.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I want to thank the speakers. I also want to thank the students from the Philadelphia area, Kala and Herta especially, that have helped out today and made this a very, very interesting webinar. And I think we'll leave it at that. Again, many thanks to everyone. And there is a recording of this, which actually, Herta, can you tell us, or Kala, where we can access the recording?